Welcome, everybody. I'm Selena Rezvani, and you're joining Women and Work Culture. You know, this live stream is really all about helping women carve out leadership paths to the top on their own terms. And today we're talking about a topic I really love, which is how to speak up so that you're actually heard. And our guest today is really the perfect person to be walking us through this, a communication expert and a total boss, Jessica Chen. Welcome, Jessica.
Thank you so much, Selena. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here and talk about a topic I'm so passionate about, communications.
Yes, it's so juicy and always relevant. And a really big welcome to our community. It's so great to see you. Anna from Maryland, Gloria from Phoenix, Joseph, hello, wherever you're joining from, Anisa from Tampa Bay. It's great to have you all. Send us your questions for Jessica today around speaking up and being heard. Right? Let me give you a little inside scoop on Jessica before we dive into our questions today. She is a trusted communication advisor to several elite tech leaders, both in Asia and here in the US in Silicon Valley. She is founder and CEO of Soulcast Media. That's a global business she founded that partners with Fortune 500 companies to really help people with their presentation, their presence, their authority. Prior to that, she was a broadcast television journalist. So, you know, talk about a great experience to bring to this conversation. She has been recognized with an Emmy Award for her work at ABC 10 News. That's so cool. I would carry that in my purse with me everywhere and show it to everybody I met. Multiple Associated Press awards. She's also a top LinkedIn learning instructor. That's how I found out about her, where her communications courses have been watched by over 100,000 learners. So can't wait to dig in today. As we go, send us your questions for Jessica about speaking up. Hello, Suman from India and Sweetie from Texas. We're so happy to have you along. So Jessica, we would love to hear a little bit about your story and specifically what got you so excited or what has meaning for you around teaching, speaking up.
Yeah, this topic is something I'm so passionate about. And the reason why is because, so for those who don't follow me on LinkedIn, I talk a lot about my own personal journey to being a better communicator. I'll never say I'm the best communicator or, you know, an expert communicator in any sense, but I spend the time trying to figure out how to hone these skills. And a lot of it's given my background as a broadcast journalist. So for me, the journey started as I didn't start out as a really good communicator. I grew up in a very traditional Asian household. I'm, you know, Asian American, and my parents weren't the type to be very open in their communications. Everybody just kind of kept things to themselves, right? So that doesn't necessarily teach you exactly how to express yourself and how to express yourself effectively. So for me, I really, early on, fortunately, I realized there is value in being a good communicator. And even though I didn't necessarily learn those tools in my home, that didn't necessarily mean I couldn't go out and learn it myself. So I really took the initiative to learn, to put myself out there and just figured out what resonated and what didn't. Fortunately, being a broadcast journalist, you really are thrown in there and you really got to do it. So that's kind of how the journey started.
Yeah, I loved one of the stories you told in an interview I listened to with you where you said, look, this has not always been natural for me. You were telling a story about how your parents were always saying to you, like, come on and say hi to your auntie. Yeah. You know, don't be so shy. Don't be so, you know, to yourself. And I think a lot of us can relate to feeling like that at one point or another.
Yeah, I'm a true introvert. I prefer kind of sitting and reading in my nice little corner of a couch, right? I love that. I'm quite shy naturally. So for me to actually go out and put myself out there, it does take effort. But this is the one thing I always say. If you put in the effort, you put in the work, it gets easier. So that's kind of been my motto.
I love that. I want to start with something you talk about in your course when it comes to speaking up. And it's not an outer thing. It's actually an internal thing. It's about mental barriers. Will you talk to us about how that informs the ways you speak up or don't?
Mm-hmm. So the beauty of starting Soulcast Media is now I get to work with people who want to be better communicators, and I have a program where I help people dive into why has it been so hard going out and communicating. And so I always think back to my own experiences. So what I do is I identify these mental barriers, and broadly speaking, I divide them into three things. It's your childhood experiences that you've had, which I've talked about before. Is it your cultural experiences? So, in Asian American culture, a lot of us are told just to, kind of put your head down, just do the work, don't try to bother anybody. So culturally, a lot of this I was taught growing up as well. And then work experiences. And I feel a lot of our perception of how we should communicate and what is good communications come from these three experiences. And a lot of times, if we have had a bad experience communicating, that sticks with us, right? And then we're like, not going to do that again, right? But sometimes you have to just think that was just a one-off bad experience. That doesn't necessarily mean all communications, all engagements are going to be so bad as that, right? So you kind of have to break out of it. And that's what I call mental barriers.
Yeah, and the way you explain those three levels, you can almost see things getting layered on top of each other. If you had certain childhood experiences and certain cultural mindsets you bring, and then you overlay workplace influences on top of that, it's a lot to sort through, right? It's a lot to find your voice, not your parents' voice,
right,
but your voice. I want to ask a great question being posed by Suman. The question is, what's a best practice to be a good communicator? What have you observed?
Great question. So there's two things anytime somebody asks me this question. So the first thing is, you have to be proactive in finding those opportunities, right? So whether it is, and depending if you tend to be like me, the shy introvert type, that perhaps will take a little bit more of an initiative to find those opportunities to speak up, whether this is with your team, your boss, or with, public speaking, right? You're never going to be better being a communicator just reading theories. You actually have to do it. Okay. So that's number one. You have to find those opportunities to go out and speak. But the second thing is there truly are things to learn by reading. And what I mean by that is you can read about techniques that work, tone of voice, what to do with your body, right? These are actual techniques, words to say, power words. I talk about power words a lot. So what you want to say. So it's both. You find those opportunities to put yourself out there. Start little if it's not something you're necessarily comfortable with, but then also learn those techniques, body language, tone of voice, and what words usually work well when communicating.
That's awesome. I love it. And I think, I appreciate the real talk that reading is great and it helps and research helps, but it can take you only so far, right? You really have to do the exposure thing, the experience thing, and get in there yourself and get your hands dirty with it, right? And try it. Michelle asks a great related question. Do you have tips for somebody who wants to speak up but isn't necessarily comfortable, doesn't necessarily feel like a natural in that spotlight?
Mm-hmm. So one of the things I did want to talk about, and perhaps was on your list of questions, Selena, but I have the SCP method, the Strategic Communications Path. And this is an approach that I thought of myself of how you should approach putting yourself out there if this is not something you are already comfortable with. So what this means is anytime you go into a meeting, whether it's a one-on-one meeting or with a team meeting, and you have to speak up, but you've always struggled. So first of all, you have to mentally prepare yourself to do so, right? Don't just go in and think, okay, hopefully we'll speak up. No, you have to go in with the mentality of, I'm going to find a opportunity to speak up, right? So you're changing that mentality. And so where the strategic communications path comes in is it's three things. You first have to be conscious of the environment you want to bring in, the environment you want to basically exude when you speak. So what do I mean by that? When you speak, do you want to be warm? Do you want to be serious and stern, right? You have to think about the environment that you want to bring. The second thing is the role you play. So what is your value add when you do speak up? And your value add can be different depending on the type of engagement you're in. So you can be the person who is providing the data, right? You know, if you have numbers and statistics that you think you have that can add value to the conversation, prepare that. Or do you want to be the person who can add context and color, right? Prepare that. And then finally, it's really energy. To me, energy is when you're speaking, projecting, right? If you're going to be speaking, at least try to be heard, right? So it's all about intentionally speaking. And we talk about using your stomach voice, projecting. And when you say something, say it so people can hear it. So people aren't like, I'm sorry, what did you say? Project. So those are kind of the three things I talk about. It's your environment, it's your role, and it's your energy.
I really like that. You broke it down in a way where it's something we can practice and we can look at each one of those factors. The other thing I would encourage this group to do is if you're invited to that meeting and you don't know what your role is, don't be afraid to push and ask people, you know, how can I best serve you today? Or I noticed I'm on the invite for such and such, you know, what hat were you hoping I'd wear? You know, because you're going to serve everybody better if you do that. So I love the way you broke that down. What's the energy you want to bring? Is it seriousness? Is it warmth? Is it a firm decision-making kind of energy? Yep. That's great. Talk to us about prep, because, you know, you said it's not always the best idea to wing it. Totally makes sense. What are some of the ways we want to think about preparation? Maybe we're the one giving a presentation, but maybe we're not. Maybe it's a smaller contribution to a meeting. What should we think about?
Yeah, so preparing is truly everything, right? And unless you are a naturally extroverted, it's so easy for you to communicate and chime in and, you know, ad lib. Preparing is probably the way to go, at least early on, just to get your feet wet and get comfortable in that environment. So when I think of prep, I think of also a few things. It's, you know, again, it's mentality is everything. And I don't know if that resonates with you, Selena, but I really think, you know, for people to succeed, they have to be in this mentality of proactiveness, enthusiasm, and adding value, right? It's very difficult for people to fault you if all you are trying to do is help people and add value, right? So what is your value add? And like I said, it can be different depending on what type of meeting you are in. So, you know, that's the preparation, right? Figuring out what can be your contributing elements to that meeting. And like I said, it's kind of also doing some homework in terms of, okay, who's going to be in this meeting? What do they care about? Speaking to what they care about. That's huge, right? A lot of times, and I think a lot of us have probably experienced this, we'll get into the meeting, people start talking, and then there's this one person who just kind of goes up on this tangent and they're just not like bringing it full circle, right? And so, you know, you want to be the person who's able to communicate about and to the things that other people care about. So just always keep that in mind. And that takes preparation.
I love that. And you kind of know when you're in the room with somebody, maybe they're presenting and they haven't taken the time to really think about the audience, right? Like maybe they're using acronyms or terms that aren't familiar to the group, right? It really stands out when you haven't put yourself in the shoes of the audience. And on the flip side, it really stands out when you do. You know, when you have said, what's the biggest worry on their mind, or what's the biggest goal in front of them, or what's the big passion that they think about a lot.
I will actually share like a very small story. So as a former news reporter, and this is kind of like, insider baseball insight, but when we would actually go out and report our stories, right? We'd go out, we interview people, but we'd come back and we'd write our stories, right? This is the story that we would broadcast. And every time, and we were trained to do this, we would always ask ourselves this question: why should the viewers care about this story? So similarly, why should your viewers, why should your audience, why should your team members care about what you have to say? So you have to identify what is that hook and start with that. Because if you can't hook people in the early stages, it's going to be really hard to grasp their attention in the middle. So always ask yourself this question: why should people care? And then how can you frame your message so it really resonates with folks? So that's a technique I use, and it's very helpful.
Right. Don't bury the lead.
Don't bury the lead.
Yeah, that journalist training and to really hook them early is so smart. You mentioned earlier, the fact that we can sometimes speak up and it doesn't always go so well. It's not always a slam dunk when we do it. And maybe it leaves a yucky taste in our mouth. Any thoughts around recovering or approaching it maybe a different way if we've spoken up and it did not go well?
Mm-hmm. So it's very funny because I think a lot of us, and especially women, we can be very hard on ourselves in terms of like, oh my gosh, like, why did I say that? And then you start dwelling, and then an hour later, you're still thinking about it, right? It's hard, especially if you did something or said something that you didn't necessarily intend to, or it didn't land the way you wanted it to. One thing I'll always say is, chances are people probably aren't thinking about whatever it is you're mulling over anymore, right? We are generally our worst critic. We're our harshest critic too. So even though you may have fumbled a few words, you may not have been as clear as you wanted to be, don't dwell on it. And that's the thing. Like, and I've truly had to train myself to kind of get out of that mentality, because I'm also very hard on myself. Like, I expect myself to operate at a certain level, to produce at a certain level, to perform at a certain level, right? And if I'm not doing that, I'm just like, ugh, right? So I'm very hard on myself too. But I always have to remember, if it didn't, again, land the way I intended to, chances are people probably are not really thinking about it anymore. They're worried about their own thing, their own responsibility, their to-dos. So just kind of move on, do better next time, take it as a learning experience.
I love it. Move right along, right? Because you are more than that experience. You are more than that not great sales meeting or that not wonderfully articulated comment that you made. You're much more than that. And I think this brings us beautifully to a great question. Anna has this question, Anna. How do you handle it when you're in a meeting with strong women, someone who maybe knows everything, speaks over others? How do you get a word in when you're with those dominators?
Very, very good question. And I think a lot of us have experienced that before, where you're like, oh my gosh, they're taking up all the airtime, right? Or whatever it is. So a good way to interject without offending somebody, because chances are when they're talking, they probably think their idea is amazing, it's brilliant, and then you're there, you're just kind of like waiting for that opportunity, right? So how can you talk without making them feel that you're trying to perhaps outshine them or step over them? So what I always say is, you want to try to qualify first what they are saying. So if somebody is talking, and you find that moment to jump in, instead of just saying what's on your mind, say, I love that point you just made. In fact, it made me think about ... Or that's great. I was also thinking ... So basically using what they just said and validating it, and then offering your point. So you make them feel heard, and which also won't make them feel that you are, again, stepping over them. So qualifying is huge, and it works really well.
That's such a great way to do it. It's natural feeling. And it kind of sounds like the yes and approach in improvisational comedy, right? Yes, I acknowledge that. And here's more I'd like to add to the story. So smart. I hope that helps you, Anna, because I think all of us have been there with a conversation dominator. I want to talk a little bit about something that's very now, which is doing this in a digital world with remote teams. And you have an entire course around, thinking about smart digital kind of presence. Will you talk to us about how we can make our presence felt in that virtual world?
Yeah. So I think the course you're talking about it's a course called Developing Executive Presence on Video Conference Calls. And actually, a funny story with that course is that course came out in 2018. And when it first came out, nobody was super interested unless you were already working from home, right? And then, of course, 2020 hit, and now everybody's so interested. How can I develop that executive presence now that the world is working from home? So it's a few things. So executive presence, you have to first, and this is the easiest thing to do, it's really first about your setup. So your camera, how are you positioned in your camera? How's the lighting? Is your face lit up? We've seen a lot of people where their backs are against a window and they're completely dark. Or you'll see people whose screen is completely tilted down and you just look up their chin, right? None of that exudes executive presence. And the great thing though, these are the easiest thing to fix. You simply just have to elevate your laptop when you're in a meeting. When you're off the meeting, put your books away, or if you have a stand, put it to the side, and then go back to your regular, working position. The effort, small effort like that can make a huge difference. When you're about to get on a call, tilt your screen so that you're not shooting up your chin. I always say the best, and you're framed up beautifully, Selena, you just want to have your upper half, right? This framing, your framing, it's what gives you that gravitas look. Because and I've personally seen that, you're meeting with VP CEOs and suddenly, their camera setup is so terrible that all of a sudden their executive presence kind of goes out the door, right? So just these subtle little tricks can really help. So I talk about setup in that LinkedIn Learning course, but I also talk about things like your body language and your tone of voice, because that's huge for video. And the reason why is because now that we're on video, we're just confined to our 13, 12-inch screen, right? Our frame of influence is completely squished and limited now. So every little thing that you have to show, that's saying something about you. So just want to be mindful of that. And when you are on camera, be okay using your body language, using your hands, right? It makes it a lot more engaging, and that you are enthused engaging with people if you are using your body. A lot of people kind of sit there and they're really stiff. I'd say try to avoid that. And when it comes to your tone of voice, vary it up. If you want to drive a point home, slow down your speaking. If you're just talking, you can just talk, but it's just about using that variety just to keep it engaging. So those are some of the things I talk about.
So good. That is awesome. Please send us your questions for Jessica. She's giving us such juicy, helpful, actionable tips like this so that we can be heard, that people want to kind of open up their ears and listen to our presentations, our ideas. Love your points around setup, really thinking about where you work as a set. Right? Like as a set, a film or video set, not just, your kitchen table that's doubling as a desk right now, but actually as a set, to use that tone of voice and to use gesturing as well. I have a great question that somebody asked, which is, do you have any advice around speaking if your voice shakes when you're nervous? If your voice shakes when you're nervous? What do you think about that?
So I think of a few things actually when that happens. So it's because you're nervous, that you are saying something, and, perhaps there's a lot of insecurity or, uncertainty as you're speaking. So a few ways to get, not necessarily 100% better, because I think that takes time, but ways to help you in the process is, number one, I think speaking slowly helps. It allows you to few things. It allows you time to process what you want to say, right? So slowing down your speaking, because if people who are nervous, I notice they just tend to talk really fast, so they just get it over with, right? Like I'm just going to word vomit and then just move on, right? But I think if you are just slowing down your speaking, thinking about what it is that you want to say, the words you want to use, that'll allow you to focus more on your message, not on the nerves that you're feeling. So that's what the pace of speaking that's where it can really, really help you. The other thing is just, and there's a few things. One thing about being nervous, and this is what I do when I work with people on public speaking. Most people are very nervous public speaking and they get those butterflies in their stomach. I always say, use that nervous energy and use that energy to actually be positive. So what do I mean by that? Use that nervousness and make it into the energy where you're actually using it to project yourself now versus letting it suppress you. Use it to actually help elevate. And what I mean is like using your stomach voice. So speaking in a way that's slow and intentional will, again, move your focus away from those nerves, but more focused on your projection and the message that you want to say. It's all about kind of compartmentalizing, right? So it's like you can't constantly just think about your nerves because thinking about your nerves will have you still remain a bit nervous. So you just kind of have to use it in a different way, if that makes sense. That's kind of how I thought about it. It's worked for me as well when I used to be very nervous.
It's almost easier in a way, I think, to channel energy when you're having, you have a lot of it than to just tamp it down or tell yourself stop. I think we all know that doesn't really work most of the time. So I love your idea to kind of channel it into your enthusiasm or your positive energy. And also what you said about controlling the pace. It feels good to be reminded, wait, I have some control here. I'm not just in the hot seat. I can slow down my breath. I can really think for a minute about what I want to say. Awesome. We have a great question from Anisa, and I hear this question from women in particular a lot. When trying to find your voice, how do you speak up without coming across as overly aggressive or pushy? We know that's a tightrope women in particular tend to walk. How do I say it with confidence without going overboard? What do you think?
So this is actually where I think body language can really help. So if so it's not even just talking about our tone of voice, but we can use our body to sometimes soften a message that we're saying, right? So, what can we do by that? So if we want to actually like drive a point home and it's a serious point, right? I can say, hey, this is a point I really, really want you to understand and really take in. The fact that I'm using my hands as I'm speaking gives a perception that I'm not as stiff, right? Or I'm not as rigid as what my message is really trying to convey. I'm allowing you to see that I have some, what's the word? Just like openness, open-mindedness, and, engagement as I'm working and communicating with you. So I think body language is huge. One thing is your eyes, right? Like as you're delivering your message, are you just like kind of staring down at them, right? Because that can give the impression that it's also very aggressive. So your eyes is a body language that you can think about using, looking up, looking down, moving, looking at them, right? Just creating that variety takes the intensity out of it. So just think about your body language. Think about your shoulders, right? Are they like really stiff or are you kind of relaxed as you're delivering it to them? That can help create that environment that I talked about earlier.
That's such a great way to put it. And you, by the way, are really wonderful at modeling that, like the combined warmth and authority. So I think great to watch from the master do it.
Oh gosh.
We have a tradition here, which is that we ask our guests always, what's a parting truth bomb when it comes to getting this speaking up thing right? What's something you really want to stay with all of us?
Don't be discouraged if you had a really bad experience recently speaking up, if you had a bad experience with, saying something in a meeting and it didn't necessarily land right, or if you said something and nobody responded, right? And there's this weird silence, right? Don't let those things discourage you from continuously finding those opportunities to speak up. In communications, a lot of it is not just the words you say. That's actually not the most important thing. It's actually how you make other people feel as you're delivering that message, right? So just be mindful. Of course, your words do matter, but it's really about your tone, your body language to create that environment that, hey, you do have authority. You are a boss, right? But you also have that warmth, right? And that approachability. And I think that's huge. And I think, the work in any working environment today, people want to work with people they enjoy working with, right? So how can you present yourself in a way that, hey, you know your stuff, but you also are, hey, you're fun to hang out with. You're fun to get to know. That is honestly the best type of working environment. So and communications is a huge part of that.
That's so important. Remember that piece is people advocate for and often listen to that person they like, or, that they genuinely kind of want to spend time with. I think that's a great, helpful reminder. Well, thank you, Jessica, for really helping people speak up and be heard. We love your message and the way you deliver it, by the way, completely. In the show notes, everybody, you're going to see ways that you can follow Jessica here on LinkedIn. You're going to see a link to her website so you can learn all about Soulcast Media and what she's up to. And don't forget to check out her courses on LinkedIn Learning. A lot of these tips today come from those courses, but there's more. So you'll see a link to that as well. Hey, I hope you'll stay in touch with me too. Subscribe to my newsletter. It's new, called Quick Confidence, 9,000 People Strong. And follow me here on LinkedIn as well if you aren't already. Thank you so much, Jessica. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Remember, the most courageous thing that you can still do is to think for yourself out loud. So stay well, everybody, and lead on.